Hey guys, this is Gamer Cow. Happy belated Pokemon Day. Welcome to another Pokemon Trading Card Game Online video. This time we're doing another Versus Deck Showcase because I've finally been able to find a couple of games that people are sharing their deck list with. I mentioned before how it was a really cool feature. It just doesn't work unless people actually allow you to see the lists after the games. So yeah, it's kind of hard to do a series about this consistently when the few games that you play don't really show the deck list off. So that's unfortunate. However, we are here now with a very interesting list actually. I really like this one. I don't know how consistent it is, but it sure as hell beat my Gallade deck earlier, so heck yeah. Mega Gallade is not a good Pokemon, by the way. If I ever do, like, equivalent to Puka's Bad Debt Monday thing, Gallade would probably be the first one on there, because it's not that good. Anyway, let's take a look at the super cool card here. We have something I really wanted to try and use actually, but hadn't really found the enthusiasm to build a deck for, so that's why I want to show it off here. We are showing Ho-Oh EX. So, one of the sort of overlooked cards in the recent set. It's been on a couple of people's radars. It's not really super amazing, but it is functional. It does a lot of damage when it sets up, so there is that to it. So the plus is, unlike the previous Ho-Oh, it's got 180 HP instead of 160, so it's a bit harder to knock out. It doesn't have the greatest retreat cost in the world, and of course the weakness is quite bad because Breakpoint introduced all the water types, and even though it's not as popular as it is in Expanded, Standard still has Seismitoad, so I don't know, it's not the greatest of things ever in terms of the stats down below, but it does have quite a bit of HP. It has a potential tanking capability if you have a fire energy on it, but its attack kind of takes every other type of energy, really. So Ho-Ohs have traditionally been the card to have like Rainbow Wing, or so the types of attack. I think Vivillon has it as well at the moment, where it does more damage for every different type of basic energy that's on it. This one instead just goes for the Lugia approach of needing 3 different types of energy and doing a ton of damage with that. Thankfully it doesn't discard those energy, otherwise this thing would be completely unplayable, but it does take a Grass, a Water, and a Lightning to do the 130 damage, as you see here. Also does 30 to a bench Pokemon, so it's basically a Darkrai Night Spear with 40 more damage, but with an extremely unwieldy attack cost. Like, you see an attack like this, and you would normally expect it to do 200-300 damage, because that's the kind of level we'd be thinking about in terms of ease of use, let's say. But no, this thing just does 130 and 30, so it's alright. It's not gonna one-shot anything anytime soon, but it does do some bench damage as well, which can be significant in setting up other KOs. God knows Crobat and Golbat do that enough, so we know it's a viable play, doing bench damage and whatnot. But the question is, how are you gonna set this thing up? It takes 3 different energy types and potentially a 4th one if you want to be able to heal. That heal is actually pretty good though. 50 damage healing is not bad at all on something with 180 HP. So it can save you from getting 2-shot, which is nice. Problem is it takes a 4th energy, so there is that. But what we do have that can set, a lot of stuff up, really, especially when lightning energy is involved, is Mega Manectric. So 2 energy, it is a Mega Evolution, so 210 HP is a little bit short on the Mega stat side, but it's the same as Gardevoir, so whatever. Yeah, 0 retreat cost is really good too. 210 HP, 110 damage for 2 energy is pretty respectable, and you get any 2 basic energy back onto one of your Pokemon. So the idea would be to have Ho-Oh on the bench, get Mega Manectric set up as soon as possible, preferably by turn 2, and Turbo Bolt 2 different energy onto Ho-Oh so that you can then attack with the slightly more powerful Elemental Feather for the rest of the game. It also helps that Ho-Oh resists fighting, whereas Manectric is weak to fighting, so as much as Manectric is your main attacker, Ho-Oh can really do a decent bit against the fighting decks that give Manectric trouble. So that is a pretty solid option. However, these two by themselves are not going to be able to handle absolutely everything, so we do have a couple of alternative attackers here. Seismitoad is an interesting choice. I don't know if I like it in this deck, but it does at least provide the disruption that it always does, and it is just one copy, so you can ditch it if you don't need it. Quaking Punch is pretty good. Grenade Hammer is alright when you've got the water energy to work with it, and this deck does run enough healing factors that you could mitigate the damage that you do to yourself. So it can still provide a good finisher as well as stopping the opponent from truly setting up. However, this deck doesn't run any double colorless energy because nothing else can really use it. So the, I guess, long-term viability of Seismitoad is a little bit sketchy here. It really just doesn't do very much, and it takes 2 turns to start. So if you lead with this thing, or if it's the only Pokemon you have in your opening hand, it's probably gonna slow you down a lot. So I'm not sure how much I like this card, but it does have probably the best attack in the game in terms of disruption, so that's always a thing. And then we have the other option here is Articuno. This deck plays 2 of them, which to me is a bit interesting actually. It's good to have a non-EX attacker, so Articuno definitely fills that role nicely, and it can potentially do quite a bit of damage if you are lucky, because Tri-Edge can do up to 140 damage, which is pretty solid, especially if you've sniped an EX with Ho-Oh and then you somehow, luckily get the triple heads and you just knock it out, because Articuno has the Delta Plus ability, or ancient trait really. It's not an ability because Garbodor doesn't shut it off, but it basically has Lugia EX's overflow from the Plasma era, so you take an extra prize when you knock out enemy Pokemon. So this is really, really good against non-EX attackers, especially if you've already softened them up with our dear friend Ho-Oh. And yeah, you can take multiple prizes with this thing. You can take 3 prizes if you KO an EX, which is pretty solid. So yeah, the only catch is that it has awful base damage, so if you are not very lucky with coin tosses, then you are probably not going to get very much out of this. 60 to 100 is, 60 is probably the most expected output, which is not good for 2 water and colorless. This deck does only run 4 water energy, and Ho-Oh needs 1 to attack, so it's difficult to power up, which is why running 2 of them is a bit interesting to me. However, it does once again resist fighting, which is probably the reason to run 2 of these over 1 Articuno, 1 Regice, which is probably what I would have first considered, but I'm not the one who playtested this deck, so there you go. Chilling Sigh is also pretty good, as a sort of, oh crap, I'm going second and my opponent is running a super fast deck thing. You can kind of stop them from attacking some of the time. It's all luck based, but as we've seen with the Malamar on my God of War deck, pretty much any time that you can potentially stop your opponent from attacking is a time that you can steal away turns that you really shouldn't have. This is especially good against Seismitoad actually, because Rough Seas, which is the stadium of choice for this deck, is extremely good at stopping Quaking Punch from killing you, right? So your water and lightning Pokemon can heal for 30 damage every turn. So this is where Quaking Punch doesn't, not Quaking Punch, Grenade Hammer doesn't really matter too much, because you can just Rough Seas away the damage that you did to yourself. And yeah, it's very solid with Manectric as well, because Manectric does tend to survive 1 hit at least, and you can stop it from getting killed by bats and stuff like that. At least without a really heavily dedicated spiel of bats against like 1 Manectric, you can kind of stop it from dying to that, so pretty solid. So that's essentially all the Pokemon that we're looking at here, so let's take a look at some of the training stuff here. Probably the thing that makes this deck work more than anything is Max Elixir. So this is something I've been testing a lot in other decks, and it's really good if you are running a lot of basics, usually sort of basic EX stuff. It'll work very well for Ho-Oh here because you can get energy out of the deck quickly. It works quite good with Manectric if you Mega Evolve it after using this. There is another Mega deck that I've been running this in that you basically just need to Mega Evolve after you play this, so it's pretty solid. But yeah, you can take energy from your deck if you have them in the top 6. Usually you want to run 12 to 14 energy with Max Elixir, and this deck does run right in the middle of that, 13 energy. So it's a pretty solid amount, and you should be able to land most of your Max Elixirs as a result of that. There are a couple of cards that kind of conflict with this though, one of which is essential to this deck because Mega Manectric accelerates when discard, kind of like Yveltal, so you need to have Battle Compressor so you can dump energy in the discard. The problem is the more energy you dump from the deck to the discard, the less energy Max Elixir has to run. So there's a bit of a balancing act involved in that, and that can get tricky. But Battle Compressor lets you discard the grass and the fire energy from the deck, which are not the energy you want to be drawing for your other attackers. They are only good for Ho-Oh, so if you can ditch those and then Turbo Bolt them onto Ho-Oh fairly early on, it's gonna work out. It's a pretty strong combination. So there is that. The obvious other advantage is you can ditch a lot of the tech supporters. There's a lot of one-off copies of stuff here. You can ditch most of these that you don't really want to draw but do want access to for late in the game, with the obvious 4 Versus Seeker here. So Battle Compressor is really good. I'm actually surprised there's only 2 of them in here. I would have thought you might want to run 3, but then when I looked at the deck, there's not really a huge amount of space to run 3, so you could, I guess, take out the next card that we have here, which is Professor's Letter, but Professor's Letter is really nice to finish off a Ho-Oh charge after Turbo Bolting, right? Because Ho-Oh needs extremely specific energy. We've already established that. 3 different types of energy. Turbo Bolt gets you 2 of them easily, but you might not have access to the 3rd one, and that's where Professor's Letter comes in, because you can just search the deck for any energy that you need. Up to 2 of them. Of course, if you take 2 of them out that way, you're going to have less for Max Elixir, but especially later on in the game when there might only be 2 energy left in the deck, this is a really solid play. And like I said, if you've got 2 different types of energy on Ho-Oh, you can search out the 3rd one and start attacking with that. And Ho-Oh is really the attacker you want to transition to, because it is your strongest damage output. So yeah, definitely worth running a copy of this, especially because one of your Tech Trim supporters here is Skylar. So Skylar's an interesting card for a deck like this, right? Because you do need a lot of different trainers, and there's quite a few that there are only 1 copy of within the deck. So with Skylar, you could get the Professor's Letter if you need energy for attaching. You could get the Manectric Spirit Link, which you need if you want to there it is. If you don't want to end your turn to become Mega Manectric, you do need to have this, so Skylar can get you that fairly easily. There is only 1 copy of Floatstone in this deck, so if you need to use that to retreat from the starting position, say Seismitoad is your active and you really don't want that, or if you start with Articuno, or even Shaman sometimes, even though Shaman only has a 1 energy retreat cost, you don't always want to be attaching to Shaman to retreat it, so stuff like that is helpful. Yeah, it's a great utility card when you have Battle Compressor and VS Seeker, so good to see that around. A lot of other one-offs that you can see here is mostly in the sports line. AZ is a pretty standard one-off. This lets you reuse your Shaman, that's pretty much the major reason to use it. Also, this deck doesn't really run retreating aids. Floatstone as a one-off is the only retreat based card in this deck, so AZ can help you get out of bad lead matchups as well, so that would be my other winter stuff. Yeah, the Seismitoad lead is really not good, so AZ can sort of get you out of that. Other stuff that's kind of cool is the one-off Hex Maniac. Not really the sort of card I've tested too much because it's really a tech rather than, you know, a sort of standing card. A lot of decks are running this though, and I can see why, because it is extremely powerful. It's basically a one-turn Garbodor, which is really neat because you just play it as your supporter and the opponent can't set up, they can't run their Shaman. If they're running something like Magnezone Raigo, of course they can't run Magnezone's ability. It shuts off all sorts of really cool stuff. That it shuts off bats as well, which is something that most other ability negators can't do. You know, Silent Lab can't shut off Golbat, Crobat, neither can Wobbuffet because they're Psychic type. And it also helps against Trevenant if you are going against that, which right now, because of the Psychic challenge, you're probably going to be going against a lot of Trevenant. I've seen Trevenant Gengar in like 3 of every 4 games I've played in the last 2 days, so kind of silly. But yeah, Trevenant's item lock doesn't work when Hex Maniac is in play, so that's pretty good. The catch, of course, is that you can't play your own Shaman, so you need to be mindful of your timing when you play Hex Maniac. But if you can work around it, very good card. It's a tech, and I generally don't have enough luck to run techs over consistency. So I personally would probably switch this out, but it is extremely good if you, you know, I guess lucky is probably the wrong word, but if you're not unlucky enough to be forced to run more draws and stuff like that, it's pretty good. One copy of Judge is also fairly standard. I don't like it very much when I've played with it because it doesn't draw me enough cards, and usually when I'm playing a shuffle draw, I want to be drawing more cards. I do like the disruption on the opponent, and I have been burned a few times by judging, my opponent judging me and getting me out of a really good hand. So, as a one-off, it's fine. It's going to get replaced in the next set when N unfortunately returns to the format, but that is for another time. It's just a cool card, and if you can fit it into your deck, then you should probably have a go. Only one Lysander. Lysander is going to be in everybody's deck, although usually as a 2-of rather than just a 1. I don't know, a lot of people just run one Lysander as well. I tend to run one because I don't generally care about forcing the opponent's Pokemon to switch, but it is extremely good in the right circumstances. You can pick off those Shaman. It's also a good battle compressor target when you only run one of them, so that you can just burst a Secret Bat whenever you need it. And yep, extremely powerful card. Used to be a trainer, and just a basic item. Thank God those days are over, right? In terms of draw stuff, there's only really the 4 Sycamore and the 1 Birch. There's obviously the usual debate between Birch and Shauna. I personally have not tested Shauna yet because I've not been burned enough times by Birch to really care. But in this deck, in my very brief sort of what I like to call flow testing, basically playing the game against the AI so I can see how the deck runs, I tended to find that I was discarding a lot of material with Sycamore that I really needed to keep. So, all sorts of stuff like more Mega Manectrics. There's no recovery in this deck, so Sycamoring away a Mega Manectric is pretty painful. But stuff like that, or I had to discard, things like either the Floatstone or generally just multiple supporters that I really didn't want to ditch. Or my usual thing is that I get 2 or 3 VS Seeker and have to Sycamore them all away, and I'm very sad. But, yeah, I would probably want to switch the lines a little bit here because, honestly, this deck doesn't want to discard everything. I feel like if you ran a slightly thicker Battle Compressor line, run 3 Compressor, then you could probably get away with running more Shuffle Draw rather than Sycamore. But, of course, Sycamore is the most powerful draw card we have right now, so it's perfectly legitimate to run 4 of them. It just honestly depends on your own luck there. The other stuff, I guess the only other item of note is the 2 Muscle Band here. Muscle Band is pretty good to allow Ho-Oh to KO stuff like Gallade at 150 HP, And it also works on the 180 HP EXs if you snipe them with Elemental Feather first. So you hit them for 30 on the bench, and then you can hit them for 150 when they come out into the active spot. So Muscle Band, it's always going to be a debate as to Muscle Band versus Fighting Fury Belt. Honestly, I think both work in this deck, because Ho-Oh's ability lets it be tanky, so the 220 HP that Fighting Fury Belt would give you, that would work very well with Ho-Oh's ability. But 140 damage is not enough to knock out a lot of the sort of stage 2 stuff that you would see, so I can also see the use for Muscle Band here, and I think Muscle Band is probably the better play, because if you get Startling Megaphone on your Mega Manectric once a Mega Manectric is hit, if Startling Megaphone gets used, you could then use Muscle Band on Mega Manectric as well. You can't run Fighting Fury Belt on it because it is an evolution, so yeah, Muscle Band's probably the better choice in this deck, but maybe a split would be better. That's something you would have to test, and as I stated in my last one of these videos, I don't really test these decks first, because they aren't my decks to begin with. I just want to share some of the cool stuff that I see online, and maybe edit some of them a little bit so I can say, you know, this is how I personally would test it, but they're not going to be fully refined list for me, so there you go. In terms of energy count, the most common energy of course is the lightning energy, because that is what Manectric needs to attack. Water energy is what the other non-EX attackers need here. Well, I say non-EX, really just the water attackers need a lot of that. Of course Ho-Oh needs it as well, so it makes sense to run them, because otherwise how are you going to attack? And of course grass energy is needed for Ho-Oh, but only Ho-Oh. Same with the fire energy here, so you only run 3 in total. Yeah, that does make sense. It's very easy to get them out of the deck with either Professor's Letter or Battle Compressor, and you can even use them to pay for energy retreat costs and stuff like that, so you can turbo bolt them to the correct target. So yeah, that is the deck in a nutshell. The strengths of it is always going to be Mega Manectric. Mega Manectric is just an extremely good card, and it is pretty resistant to energy denial as a result of having Mega Manectric. It can do bench damage, which is something that not every deck can do, and that's a pretty good plus. Also, Ho-Oh being colorless means that resistance is not a problem. Of course, weakness is not going to be a thing either, but you do find stuff that's resistant to, say if you're using Fighting or Psychic or even Steel, of course, because Manectric is resistant to Steel, but yeah, resistance can play a factor in some decks, not really in this one, so that's pretty solid. The weaknesses I see, other than just being clunky, because Ho-Oh is just naturally a clunky card, there's not really any way you can fully mitigate that. I think this deck does a pretty good job of doing that well though. Basically it does as good a job as it can of making Ho-Oh quick enough and, you know, versatile enough to keep up. I don't like the fact that this deck doesn't have any recovery options, but maybe it doesn't need it. It depends on what you discard, but like painful discards with Sycamore and stuff like that can be really nasty. I would probably like a Sacred Ash in here if you could find space, because let's face it, you're turbo bolting energy out of the discard, so you don't really need to have Super Rod, and Sacred Ash will let you get all the Mega Manectrics and stuff back, so you could be a little bit more reckless about discarding them. You could also then search it with Skylar, so you'd only need one of them, so that would be kind of nice to see. And no retreat options outside of 1 AZ and the Floatstone. That's probably the biggest thing that gets me, is there's a ton of bad starts in this deck. Like, you only really want to start with Manectric. You don't want to start Articuno, although it's the second best starter, but you don't really want to start Articuno because you need a water energy specifically for its first attack, and it does have a 2 energy retreat cost. You definitely don't want to start Seismitoad because there's no way you're energizing this in 1 turn. Might be okay if you're going first, but it's not where you want to be spending your first 2 attachments, right? You don't want to start Ho-Oh because Ho-Oh needs very weird energy and you really want to be accelerating this. You can't accelerate it if it's active. And of course you don't want to start Shaman because you don't get to set up. So you only have 3 out of 10 Pokemon that you actually want to start with in this deck. So most of the time it's going to be super awkward. And the lack of retreating or switch out options, it's a bit jarring. I will admit, that is something that I see as a bit of a problem. Now, as much as I've said all of that, I probably haven't really fixed like any of the problems that I've suggested there, but there are a couple of alternative things that I would like to sort of suggest for this deck. One of them, I think, I don't know how much you really need to Articuno. That might be something that I'm just misrepresenting a lot here, but I don't feel like 2 is necessary. It just seems a bit superfluous. Like, it's nice to force a 7 prize game, but you only do that with 1 Articuno, you don't do that with 2. And one sort of tech card that I would have expected would just naturally go with Ho-Oh would be Smeargle. So basically, Smeargle just lets you take an energy from your discard pile and switch it with one that's on your active Pokemon. Normally this is kind of worthless, but it's really good in decks that have 2 or in this case 3 different energies that you need to play. So if you only have, say if you max Elixir to a Ho-Oh, and so you've got 2 of the same energy type on it, or you know, you've got, I don't know, Lightning and Water in your hand, you've got a Grass and a discard, and you know, Ho-Oh has only Water and Lightning itself, you could attach that one of those 2 energy to it, second coat it to switch it for the Grass, and then you can attack. Of course this helps with Manectric as well, because you might end up max elixiring 2 non-lightning energies to it, and so you can second coat one from the discard to get the Turbo Bolt off. There's a lot of potential for this card in this deck. It also only has a 1 energy retreat cost, so it's a bit easier to get out of the active when you have a bad start with it, so that's kind of a thing. I also would beef up the Manectric line. I don't think Seismitoad is really worth it in this deck. That's probably something that in testing I might go, oh, it's actually alright, but Manectric is what you really want to start with here, so, and it's pretty good by itself too. I didn't really go over the base Manectric, but you know, this deck does run 2 Muscle Bands, so Assault Laser for 140 is pretty strong. If the opponent uses a tool, which let's face it, most of the opponents are going to be running tools, then Assault Laser does 120, 140 with a Muscle Band. That's pretty solid damage. So yeah, Manectric itself is still a good attacker even if you don't get to Mega Evolve it. So a 4-3 line just makes a bit more sense to me. So Pokemon wise, that's probably what I would adjust. I haven't really done a huge amount to the trainer line, just adding a couple more things to tech stuff. Since I took out one of the Articuno and the Seismitoad, there's a little bit less demand for Rough Seas to be in play all the time, so I'd only run 2 of that. I would want an extra Floatstone in here. I've stated before, Hex Maniac is not really for me because I just don't have consistent enough drawing to go with that. And I also mentioned that I was discarding a lot of painful resources with Sycamore in here, so those two cards taken out for a couple extra birches just gives me a bit more shuffle draw. This is probably one of those decks where Shauna would maybe be better, because you'd be able to just constantly draw 5, which works with Max Elixir because then you don't necessarily draw all your energy. It works quite well with the Battle Compressor, and Shaman works pretty well with both Birch and Shauna, so yeah, couldn't really think of my words for a set there. But yeah, just adding a little bit more retreat aids, especially although we've kind of cut a couple of the heavy retreats out of here, but Articuno still is a sketchy start, and Ho-Oh, 2 energy retreat cost, it works quite nicely with Floatstone, so just adding that little bit extra ability to retreat into this deck I think would make it a little bit more consistent. Some of the stuff I would like to add, I think I've already mentioned, I'd like a third battle compressor in here, because honestly, battle compressor is just super good in this deck. There really isn't much of a reason not to try and run more, but apart from deck space, so there is that. I would like to see maybe switching out the Judge for a Giovanni's Scheme, because with a Muscle Band and Giovanni's Scheme, Elemental Feather would hit 170 damage, which is enough to KO the lighter EXs, right? So that is definitely something that could work. That's something I would test if I was wanting to play test this deck. Other stuff, it's kind of hard to say. Like Sacred Ash again is something I would like to see, but I don't know where you would fit it into the deck. So I don't know. Maybe you could. Maybe you guys could help and discuss stuff that way. Also, yeah, I think the energy count is fair because Manectric only needs 2 and Ho only needs 3, and there's plenty of ways, especially if you could somehow get the third battle compressor in here, that there'd be plenty of ways of getting the right energy in the discard. Maybe switch out one of the Max Elixir, because Max Elixir doesn't work with battle compressor discarding all the stuff. So yeah, maybe that's the call. Switch out one of the Max Elixir, put a battle compressor in, have it as a 3-3 setup. I also noticed there's no Trainer's Mail in here. That took me a little bit to sort of work out, but maybe Trainer's Mail is something that would work. I don't know how you would fit it in, but yeah, I don't know. If you guys have any suggestions, then go ahead and put them in the comments, and maybe we could take a proper look at this deck in the match or something. I don't know. I'm kind of curious as to see. Yeah, get your English right, cow. I'm kind of curious to see how this deck works, right? Because it kicked my Gallade deck's butt, but Gallade is not a good card. So I say Mega Gallade, I should really say. Gallade itself is amazing, but yeah. Anyway, waffling on way too long at this point. Basically, Ho-Oh is cool. Not great, but cool. This has been Gamer Cow, showing off a versus deck, a deck I found on the versus ladder in Pokemon Trading Card Game Online. And until next time, happy belated Pokemon Day, and take care.